Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to be part of this special event. And I want to, as you heard from Mary, really acknowledge the longtime partnership between Catalyst and GM that goes back many, many years. And most recently, to thank GM for the GM Foundation for your financial support of Catalyst's work in doing research and looking at breakthroughs for women of color. I'm really delighted to be part of this event, working with a company that's clearly committed to excellence and has a keen understanding of what drives innovation. And while it's pretty common for me to have a chance to address a large audience of women, I don't often have the chance to speak to such a global group, and it's even more rare for me to have the opportunity to be part of an event in a Fortune 500 company that's led by a woman. As Mary said, I had the great honor of hosting her as the keynote speaker at this year's Catalyst Awards conference. 800 people were in the room and were inspired by her personal story and learned from her advice. Mary exemplifies something that has become increasingly clear to me as I travel around the world. There is no such thing as women leaders and men leaders. There are just good leaders and bad leaders. Some of them are men, and some of them are women. In fact, when I asked some of Mary's colleagues about the words that they would use to describe her, there was remarkable consistency. They talked about her as being collaborative, passionate, tenacious, decisive. They described her as a clear and consistent communicator and a thoughtful risk taker, and we heard that in her remarks this morning. What I really love about those words is that they describe someone who is helping to redefine the way we think about leadership simply by doing her job and being true to her authentic self. In many ways, Mary's example is at the core of what I'd like to talk about this morning. And that is why inclusive workplaces, the kind of workplaces where employees feel both like they are unique individuals, but at the same time members of their team, is so essential for individual career satisfaction, for team performance, and for overall organizational results. And it's why I believe firmly that inclusion is the foundation on which sustainable change for women at work must be built. So before getting to the topic at hand, I thought I'd start with my own story. I grew up in pretty difficult circumstances. My mom and dad raised 5 kids in an old farmhouse with no central heating, bathtub, or shower. My mother cooked on a stove that was heated by wood, and for a long time, our phone had a crank on the side and 2 bells on the top. And because we were poor, we didn't have the same things that other kids had. When I enrolled in Girl Scouts, my parents couldn't afford the uniform. So as a compromise, my mom bought me the sash that you sewed your badges on and the hat. We called it a tam back in the old days. I don't know what they call it now. She thought that by giving me those 2 pieces of the uniform that I'd feel better, when in fact, it just made me stand out. It drew attention to what I didn't have and left me feeling exposed and frankly kind of embarrassed. Getting from there to where I am today was made possible by my parents and teachers who taught me the importance of working hard and getting a good education. And they encouraged me to set my sights beyond just getting a job to pay the bills, but to focus instead on building a meaningful career. In high school and university, that work hard and get good grades advice that I received at school and at home served me very well. Certainly, the socioeconomic differences between me and my classmates seemed to fall away as my academic performance led to leadership roles at school and to scholarships. And being a woman didn't seem to be a barrier in an environment where test results were what mattered, and where, frankly, I was smarter than most of the boys in my class. But as I moved into the working world, I began to see that what you know is important, but equally important is who knows you. And that being different wasn't always seen as a positive. In my career in business and politics, I was often the only woman in the room. Later, as a member of the National Black MBA Association, I found that I was the only white person in the room. And more recently, moving to New York to run Catalyst, I found myself covering the fact that I'm a Canadian. I've learned to ask for directions to the restroom instead of the washroom. I've learned to say presentation instead of presentation. And I've learned to spell labor and color and honor with a U. Without a U, sorry. Why? Because while I want to be recognized for the unique traits that I bring to my role, I also want to feel connected to and part of the larger group. That's what inclusion means. It's what allows leaders like Mary Barra and Pepsi's Indra Nooyi and Apple's Tim Cook, all of whom in some way are different from what many people picture when they think of a CEO, to remain focused and successful because they don't have to hide who they are at work. In fact, who they are is a key part of what makes them and the companies they lead so successful. So how do we create workplace cultures that allow more Marys and Indras and Tims and Deborahs to succeed? First, we have to face some hard truths and acknowledge that what worked in school won't work nearly as well in the real world. That means that women have to avoid what I call the good student syndrome. Put your head down, work really hard, do a good job, and wait for someone to notice. We need to spend time building a network of allies. Because in the working world, as I said, who knows you is often more important than what you know. As you can imagine, it wasn't exactly a straight line from where I grew up to my office on Wall Street or this stage in Detroit. My experience and Catalyst research bears this out. It has taught me that when it comes to career and advancement, women need mentors and sponsors to help us get to yes. And while the two terms are often used interchangeably, there's a very important distinction. Think of it this way. A mentor talks to you, offering advice and guidance. That relationship is often driven by you. A sponsor talks about you, advocating for you to be given important assignments, international roles, and other career-advancing, mission-critical opportunities. My first sponsor found me when I was a university student completing an internship in Canada with the government of Nova Scotia. He took me under his wing, offered advice and mentorship, and later used his influence to recommend me for a high-visibility project that positioned me for the next big opportunity. When confronted with, we don't know her work, and she's not ready, all code for let's pick one of our buddies instead, he stood firm. Looking back, I can draw a straight line from his sponsorship to the opportunity I later received to become a candidate for elected office. Unfortunately, Catalyst research finds that women are less likely than men to be offered those high-visibility, mission-critical assignments that will position them for advancement, and are less likely than men to benefit from highly placed sponsors who are prepared to play the role that my first sponsor played in my life. So it's pretty clear that even in organizations with a strong commitment to diversity, and even when leaders have the very best of intentions, stereotypes or unconscious biases, all natural human instincts come into play, as assumptions are made about women's skills and aspirations, and as decision makers are instinctively drawn to someone who looks, sounds, and feels familiar to them. In a recent column in the New York Times, Nicholas Kristof made a really important point when he argued that even those who believe in equality sometimes make decisions that inadvertently transmit both racism and sexism. His perspective brought to mind a young woman I once met in India. Her boss expressed great confidence in her, gave her glowing performance reviews and feedback, but always seemed to offer the big assignments to one of her male colleagues. When she asked him why, he told her that the more important jobs often required working outside of regular business hours, and confessed that he was concerned for her personal safety. While his intentions were good, his attitude was depriving her of the opportunity to gain important experience and visibility. She needed her boss to empower her to make decisions herself instead of choosing to make them for her. Getting past roadblocks like these requires us to think differently about both leadership and inclusion. Companies should follow the wonderful examples set by our 2015 Catalyst Award-winning organizations, Chevron and Procter & Gamble. P&G refuses to use violence against women as an excuse for not hiring them. Instead, the company collaborated with local governments in India to change the law so that women workers in its India-based plants could get to and from work safely. Then there's Chevron, where inclusion is everybody's business, not solely the responsibility of senior executives or an issue most employees expect HR or women's and minority affinity groups to deal with. In fact, Chevron's policy of holding everyone accountable, everyone in the company, for diversity and inclusion reinforces what Catalyst's latest research on inclusive leadership shows, and what's been a long-held belief of mine. True leadership is a function of behavior, not authority. In today's workplace, people from all walks of life at all levels of society are redefining and expanding our notions of what a leader looks like by demonstrating the 4 behaviors that Catalyst research links to inclusion. They are empowerment, accountability, courage, and humility. We call it the EACH framework. It takes humility to admit that your way of doing something is not necessarily the best or only way, courage to try something different, empowerment to get the best from the people you're leading, and accountability to get the job done. And importantly, for a company like GM, these are the same qualities that Catalyst research shows allows employees like me or Mary or Indra or Tim to feel both unique and like we belong, resulting in higher levels of career satisfaction, team citizenship, and innovation. This research resonated for me as I thought back on my own career, the people I worked for, and the leadership styles that I have tried to emulate. Earlier in my career, I worked for a man who was not only a guy's guy, holding stereotypical views about women, but was also someone who motivated his staff through fear and intimidation, micromanaging every aspect of every project. And while he got results because we worked hard and were scared to do otherwise, innovation and creativity dropped as we all lived in fear of making a mistake. Part of what needs to change in workplaces around the world again goes back to the work that Chevron has done to hold every employee accountable for inclusion. Implicit in this policy is an understanding that women cannot make progress alone. We need committed allies, including men, to model inclusive leadership behaviors and advocate for women colleagues to be given equal opportunities to advance. We saw evidence of this quite recently when Catalyst gathered leaders from employee resource groups across the country and around the world to share practices. We saw straight women leading LGBT ERGs, white women championing women of color, and men participating in women's ERGs. Each of those examples followed the advice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who in his famous 1963 I Have a Dream speech praised white allies who had come to hear him speak for realizing that their destiny is tied up with our destiny, and reminding us that we will never truly achieve inclusive workplaces unless we unite together behind a common goal. That's why Catalyst created MARC, Men Advocating Real Change, an online community for men, and launched the MARC Leaders Program, a new 6-month course designed to teach men how to uncover their unconscious bias and lead the fight for gender equality in their workplaces. That's why I'm thrilled to announce that more than 40,000 learners from 200 countries around the world participated in Catalyst's first open line course on inclusive leadership. To make progress, we need to come together and we need to start asking some different questions. Questions that challenge stereotypes and accepted gender norms and force us to think about our workplaces and work in a different light. Freud once asked, "What do women want?" Well, that's the wrong question in 2015, because today it's not just about what women want, it's about what all of us want. Women, men, children, families, and companies need women to succeed for all of us to succeed. We need workplaces where all women and men are given equal opportunity to succeed and equal pay for equal work, where pregnancy is treated like a brief life stage, not a permanent professional obstacle, where fathers are treated as co-parents who have equal responsibility for their families and deserve equal consideration when it comes to flexible work and parental leave, where childcare and work-life effectiveness are viewed as everybody's issues. As for why women matter and why companies should embrace diversity and inclusion, the business case for advancing women to leadership has never been clearer. We know by now that having more women in power is a win-win-win for women, companies, and stakeholders. Having more women in leadership, on average, improves organizations' financial performance. We know that inclusion drives companies to better understand and serve their customers in different markets. And as I said, it also causes innovation to flourish. We also know that women today represent half the talent pool, earning the majority of university degrees and college degrees in many countries. And we know that women influence the majority of purchasing decisions. All of which is why I find it so encouraging that more companies are recognizing what Catalyst has known for years. Creating more inclusive workplaces is not just about fairness and equity, it's also about leveraging talent, and it's crucial to an organization's long-term success. That's why women matter at GM, in the corporate world, and in all areas of life. The great news is that despite our titles, where we live, we all have an opportunity to lead inclusively. Mary asked us as a call to action to think about what we can do differently. Part of what every person in this room can do is to lead following that model, those 4 characteristics in the EACH framework, because in every interaction we have with team members, with colleagues, with customers, with the stakeholders we're working with, we have a chance to demonstrate the behaviors that will lead to more inclusive workplaces and make change for all of us. Thank you very much.